Is there a recording?
Yeah.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Joanna Nelson, and I'm with the New Mexico Economic Development Department's finance team. I'm a finance development specialist, and I'm joined today by Juan Torres, who is the finance team director. And thanks so much for joining us. This is the first of a series that we will be unrolling to cover finance topics in New Mexico. So of course, one of the main topics and one of the subjects that we get a lot of inquiries and attention for is trying to understand our LEDA program, the Local Economic Development Act program. So hopefully today we'll be able to give you an overview of the program, what is it, and updates to the process that are new this year. And then hopefully answer any questions. So I think the webinar will take roughly 30 minutes-ish, we'll see. But at the end of Juan's presentation, then we'll take your questions. So as you get questions, if you want to type them into the questions box, which is in the bottom right hand side of the column there, type your questions and we'll be able to answer those. As well, we're recording the session, so we will put this up on our NMEDD YouTube page. And also, and we'll go into a little bit detail, we'll have upcoming webinar topics on our finance development team page, which is on our website. So you'll be able to stay up to date with that. And then also our upcoming webinars are in our NMEDD newsletter. So if you're not subscribed to that, go to the website, and at the bottom of the main website page, you can subscribe to our newsletter, and you'll stay up to date with further topics that we'll discuss. But without further ado, Juan Torres.
Thank you very much, Joanna, and I'm very happy to be here, and I'm very happy to see all of you joining us, or at least read your names. And thank you very much for putting this together. Just want to remind everyone also that we will have some, at the end of the webinar, Joanna's going to talk to some of the upcoming things that are happening, some new programs, the new exciting things to watch for. And I think we were discussing a finance kind of newsletter update itself. So look for those new developments in the coming year. So again, thank you all very much for tuning in, and let's get started. And there we go. Okay, technology is exciting stuff here. So really briefly, you know, the LEDA Act is really was created to implement the constitutional amendment that allowed for the use of public funds for economic development purposes. And as a reminder, all of the LEDA acts, local and state, have to be consistent with the constitutional prohibition against using public funds for private gain, what's colloquially known as the anti-donation clause. I see, and there we go again. And there we go again. Sorry about that, I'm trying to get this going without closing that up. There we go. All right, sorry. And off to the races. So projects that which consideration for LEDA funding arrive from a number of sources. People say, where do we get the projects? Where do they come from? They come from the community, the economic development organizations, regional representatives, New Mexico Partnership, and other sources. Getting a lot of hands going up, and this is not. Okay. Okay. So, LEDA project. So basically, and again, I'm going to kind of go through very quickly some of the basic stuff of LEDA because I want to concentrate on the changes and some of the things we're doing. But, you know, a qualified entity, 99% of what we're talking about is a manufacturer or an e-based business. That's a business that generates more than 51% of its revenue from outside of the state. There are other qualified entities, and we can look at those specifically on a case-by-case basis, but by and large, by policy, we're talking about manufacturers or e-based businesses. The qualified activities associated with land, building, and infrastructure, there needs to be a demonstrated public benefit, and in our case, at this state, we're looking for job creation, and there needs to be a security component provided. So from the community standpoint, in order for a community to participate in a LEDA project, the community has to have passed its own LEDA ordinance, the local LEDA. That LEDA also includes a provision for an economic development plan that identifies what areas the community is going to be concentrating in. And if you pass the local options gross receipts tax, or if you're intending to, then you need to identify within your plan what sorts of projects you would fund through that economic development fund. The community has to be compliant with the executive order on auditing, and we do that in a number of ways. The simplest way is that we have somebody from the finance department of the community verify that they are compliant with the auditing provisions. The community's got to be willing to act as the project fiscal agent, and I'll get into a little bit more detail on that in a minute. The security that's identified for the LEDA project will be entrusted, I guess is the word, to the community. So the community's name will appear on a mortgage, if it's a mortgage, or the community will be identified as the beneficiary of a letter of credit on behalf of the state. And of course, in order to have a LEDA project, the community must pass the project ordinance. So the Economic Development Department and the finance team, what we're going to do on the LEDA projects is we're going to perform financial analysis and due diligence. That's generally in the terms of reviewing the most recent 3 years of financials. We're going to run a credit check on the company. We're going to run a background check to the extent that we're going to look around and make sure that everything is in order. Well, based on the parameters of the LEDA project, the finance team may recommend a LEDA amount or may not. We will monitor the progress on the PPA, the IGA, the ordinance, and I'll go into a little detail about those in a bit. We'll help community in a project identify an appropriate security instrument, and we will then facilitate the transfer of funds after the ordinance is passed. Our legal counsel in-house will be the entity that reviews our due diligence materials. So if we come across any information that we need to pass by our legal counsel that we're not certain about, that will be the entity that will make the final determination. Our legal counsel will also determine if the entity in question is a qualified entity. And again, sometimes that comes up when there's some, kind of projects that it's not clear cut. They're not a manufacturer. They may or may not be e-based, and we're trying to determine their qualifications. So our legal counsel will be the final arbiter of that. The legal counsel will work with the community and the company to develop a PPA, the IGA, and the ordinance. And just colloquially, if I haven't already said it, the PPA is the Project Participation Agreement, the IGA is the Intergovernmental Agreement, and the ordinance is the project ordinance that codifies everything. And the Project Participation Agreement is generally, well, it's always entered into between the community and the company, and it outlines the scope of work of what public benefit is being identified, what the company commits to doing in terms of job creation and other public benefits, and it establishes a time frame for completion of the project. It also establishes a clawback schedule in case the project does not perform, and that in case funds have to be clawed back, they are clawed back proportionally. I should note that we endeavor not to enter into a clawback whenever possible. Obviously, we are diligent about protecting public funds, but we also want to make sure that the project has the largest opportunity for success. The Intergovernmental Agreement is essentially the exact same document, except it's an agreement between the state and the community, and it outlines roles and responsibilities. So those two documents, along with the security document, are what the local community will consider when it passes its ordinance. Our legal counsel will also be the final arbiter on approving the security instrument. So our regional representatives are very much looped into this entire process. They will work and assist the company with the application, and again, I'll talk a little bit more about that. And they'll determine the public process timeline with the community. So what does that mean? That means that each community has a different process for going through an ordinance approval. Some of them have a notification, and then a 10-day waiting or a 15-day waiting, and then a public hearing, and then a second hearing. So that's different for different communities. We outline that time frame so that all parties understand when we should anticipate completion of the project and therefore transfer funds. The regional representatives may help in drafting documents in general. They'll assist the community on the transferring of the funds, reimbursements, and the compliance issues. So they're very critical on the ground partners with the community on these projects. The Secretary and the Governor, based on the support that's demonstrated by the community and the public benefits that are outlined, will make a determination on whether a project is approved to move forward, and they will make the final determination on the exact LEDA amount for the benefit. So those decisions are made at the highest levels. So one of the main new things that we brought to the process is we have an online application via Salesforce. So again, once a project has been approved to move forward, then that triggers us in the finance team to send out a link to the online application portal that goes to the company. And here's just a little snippet of what that looks like. This is something that the company will fill out. It's got their contact information. Again, more information about the project that outlines the benefits and the job creation and the time frame. The financial information is where a company can upload its financials at that point. Ideally, we would want to try to get those ahead of time to try to make a better determination. But again, we're trying to be flexible on both ends. So, but a company would upload its financial information there, give us some background, explain the community aspect. So that's where the community can, is the community going to enter into its own LEDA? Is it going to provide some offsets on permitting? Is it going to, you know, do some fast track, some sort of thing? So that's where we identify that. Again, the job creation is identified in that bar there. So an economic impact analysis must be performed on all projects. We have an in-house economist, and on that tab there, the company will be able to download an economic impact data sheet, and they'll be able to fill that in. And when they fill that in, they can upload it back, and our economists will produce an economic impact analysis. And that's another area where the regional rep can very much help get that information together. The attachments are where you put in all your, your corporate information about, you upload your corporate papers. There is a release form, and it is absolutely necessary. The company must sign this release so that we can facilitate the entire project. If we don't have a signed release, we cannot release funds. So that's a very important thing to keep in mind. So again, the online application is not open to everyone. It's just not available to the world. Once the project has been reviewed by the secretary, the community could have brought us information. We discuss that information, and then the secretary makes a decision, and then we send out a link. That's the only way that you can make a formal application for a LEDA project. So best practices. This is some of the best practices that you might take into account that can help you with your LEDA project. So really determine if your community has passed the Local Economic Development Act. If it has not, we are more than happy to work with you on facilitating that, making sure that you got all the pieces that you need vis-a-vis the LEDA plan, and identifying your targeted areas and your areas of focus. And again, that's another place where we work close. We in finance work closely with the regional reps to facilitate those at the local level. Determine if your community is compliant with auditing. You can do that right now. I mean, even if you don't have a LEDA project today, I would encourage you to confirm that your community is compliant, and we could enter that into our database. And once we do that, we can get started right away. The whole idea is that for whatever reason, oftentimes we find that that these projects want to move very quickly. It takes it's like molasses, early on, and then after a while it goes very, very quickly. So if you have intentions, or if you think you're going to have a LEDA project in the future, you really want to make sure that you're compliant, and we get that stuff put into our database so we can, check that box and move on. Really developing a realistic public process timeline is a real essential piece. We've had some issues in the past where, because it's, the world is the world, so it goes to a committee process. Maybe a committee has a question, it gets pushed back to another committee gets added. So to the extent that we can, anticipate those sorts of things, we can have a very reasonable timeline for the company to look at to say, okay, this should be completed in 90 days or 120 days, and that helps them to plan out. So really developing a realistic public process timeline is a critical part to any project. And again, that's another thing that you can determine now, and see, and again, we'll work with you to figure that out, but you can say, well, on the average, I think LEDA projects are going to take 90 days, or et cetera. So you can do that today. And really managing the expectations. You don't want to overpromise a project, a company, especially if it turns out that they may not be a qualified entity, or that their particular activities might not be qualified for reimbursement. So I would encourage you, economic development organizations and communities out there, if you are, and businesses, to really kind of manage expectations going forward. Work with your local finance department. Again, this is specifically to the community. You want to make sure that they are understanding what's going on. They're going to have to create an internal account if the project is approved, and they are going to have to invoice us. And again, when we get to that point, we will go through all of those details with them. But you really want to start right now to get them to understand that they're going to have to create a separate account within their system, and then they'll invoice us and we'll transfer the funds. Really want to make sure that as the local economic development organizations and communities, that you're reviewing the company invoices for reimbursement, and that you can certify that the proof of payment to determine the validity. So the more that we can get that done at the local level, the quicker we can review that ourselves. So the process is that, again, the local community will review those things, and once they determine that they are legitimate and valid, that they send them to our office for a final review. So again, if you did a good job of getting that done, we can turn it around very quickly. But if we have to go through, I myself had to go through, 200 pages of invoices to make sure that the appropriate invoices were being paid. So again, we have a worksheet, we have various other tools to help communities get through that, but you really want to get that on the front end. And, really checking in with the company on the progress as the process is going through to make sure that nothing is changing on their end, or that circumstances are not changing. And certainly if you find any issues or problems, real or perceived, if you think there may be a problem, bring it to our attention and we can talk about that and figure things out before things get a little bit beyond us. Continuing the best practices for communities as fiscal agents, making sure to review the ES 903s prior to sending them to us. We require the ES 903 at two junctures. One is at the beginning of a project to establish the starting head count if the company is existing. If it's a new company starting up or moving to the community, then that obviously is starting at zero. But the company will be submitting an ES 903 to the state. That's how unemployment insurance is determined. So we'll be starting in the first quarter, and that'll be identified in the PPA with an establishing 903 that will give us a baseline going forward for what the job creation actually is. Confirming the job information with the company early on in the process so that there's no misunderstandings. I've seen a few of these misunderstandings where we were talking about one number at one point, and then as we got closer to the ordinance, that number might have shifted. So we want to really try to make sure that we are getting a very firm information on job creation and the overall public benefits that are being demonstrated. We want to make sure that the job reports are sent when due, and right now we are trying to codify and move everybody into one reporting period of the same. We're having a little bit of difficulty getting that done because now we have projects that stretch all the way back to 2013, 2012. So we're trying to work through that. The ideal is that at some point we will get everybody on a quarterly reporting basis. And that regular reporting basis will make it very easy for everyone. Certainly make it easier for us to keep track of those reports. And again, I can't emphasize enough, making sure that you're monitoring the projects for any signs of distress, and that's another area that you'll work very closely with the regional representatives. Oop, and I just glossed right over one here. Okay. So a reminder, the funds are only available to the company on a reimbursement basis. I can't count the number of times that was a shocking surprise. So the company has to expend the funds for the appropriate activity that's agreed upon in the PPA before they can request reimbursement. They have to demonstrate that they've paid those invoices, and all of this has to happen after the date that the ordinance is passed. We cannot, oh, I'm thinking that I somehow got got past me there. It's the ordinance. But it's very important that you understand that we cannot reimburse for any activities that happen prior to an ordinance date. That's a statutory requirement. So really work with your regional rep. Then my slides got magically fixed a little bit here. So work with your regional representatives. The regions are outlined there, and you can go to our website, gonm.biz. They are the go-to people on the ground that can help you figure out, is this a qualified entity? Is this a LEDA project? What are the chances of getting this project funded? And how do we get that done? So really work very closely with your regional representatives. It's critical for the success of any LEDA projects. That's all I have. I'm gonna open up the floor to questions, and Joanna's gonna read the questions. The problem with the getting people to actually ask the questions is that a lot of times we have a lot of feedback. So hopefully we got a bunch of questions there. So let's go anytime you're ready, Joanna.
Okay. One of the first questions we hear quite a bit is, what is the required information a company must submit before the company receives the link to the online application?
So that's a good question. Actually, that's a very good question. And we grapple with that all the time because we're balancing out, you know, we don't want to get too much information on the front end and then find out that, you know, it's not qualified or it's just not going to work out. So we have to balance that out. But at the basic, you know, we have to determine, is this a qualified entity? And in some cases, you know, if it looks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck. In other cases, it's a little more complicated. So information-wise, you know, assuming that a project is qualified, assuming that the project involves a company that is expanding and hiring people, permanent full-time jobs, then what we're really looking for is a sense of the financial situation with the company. Is it stable? And for that, we're going to look at 3 years of financial pro forma. So that's income statement, balance sheet, and cash flows. And you know, I know it's a hurdle. I know that it's tough. A lot of companies have a difficult time in terms of accounting, but we really, really need to see 3 years of financials. Now, if it's a startup, which it has its own set of issues, then we need 3 years of pro forma. And especially in the case of a startup, but sometimes in case of a company that's just expanding, we're also going to ask some questions about where the market is. Why are you expanding? How is it that, you know, you're going to support these jobs? Again, we want to make sure that we are helping companies create permanent, full-time, high-quality jobs. And in order to do that, we have to kind of determine that. So again, basically the answer is 3 years of financials. If you're a qualified entity and you are creating jobs, then we just want to make sure that of the financial viability. And then, you know, and that's the front end. And part of the due diligence on the back end is us to make sure that there's no outstanding liabilities otherwise, you know, to the state or other entities that might cause them to take these LEDA funds for their own use. So the bottom line is 3 years of financials, showing financial stability and viability, and that the expansion is going to make sense.
And Deborah had a question that's kind of at that point where discussion is happening if the company is, you know, while the due diligence is happening. But she said, at what point does the company need to have the security in place?
The security has to be in place prior to the passage of the ordinance, or nearly there. If we've determined that there is an instrument, then like a letter of credit, then that is identified. Once the community goes and passes the ordinance, they're going to have that information in front of them. So they're passing the ordinance with the understanding that there will be a letter of credit or there'll be a mortgage. Different communities have different standards. So if that significantly changes, they may have to go back and change it. So the best practice that I could suggest is that really early in the process, we nail down what is the security instrument. And you know, I can tell you from having participated in a number of LEDA projects that people gloss over that really at the early process. And then even the biggest companies, believe me, by the time we're getting to the closing, they're like, do you really need security? And I'm like, yes, we do need security. And so, so I think the answer to your question, Deborah, is as early as possible, but certainly I would say before or around the time of the ordinance, depending on the community.
Antoinette's question is, current state LEDA project reports are to be directed to whom now?
We're working there with, well, to me at this point, but I think what we're going to have, and I'm working with the our IT department, is that we will have a generic email, for lack of a better term, so it'll be compliance@nmedd or something along those lines. We're still working that out, but it'll be a centralized place where we could all have access to it. But for now, all compliance issues and questions on specific projects should go to me, Juan Torres, and my contact information. It comes at the end of this presentation as well as being on the website.
Trisha had a question asking about an example of a successful project.
Many, many, many successful projects, Trisha. Well, I mean, a lot of the ones that people are familiar with is Facebook, for instance. And I mean, I guess I could ask, what do you mean by successful? I mean, successful is job creation is happening. We had all the pieces in place. It was done, and we're very happy with the outcome, and they seem to be performing. Safe Light is another example of a project. Keter Plastics is one that's near and dear to the Secretary's heart. So yes, we have a lot of success stories. They are on our website. All our past performance for previous LEDA projects are on our website, and we're working with the North Central Economic Development Council of Governments. We have been working with them through a project called RESTRA to basically put all the post-approval projects and documents online. So I think, correct me if I'm wrong, we should have all the 2015 projects available on the RESTRA.
Up to 2016.
Up to 2016. So 2015, 2016 projects should be available on RESTRA.com. RESTRAproject.com. And if you go there, you'll find the executed PPAs, the executed IGAs, the ordinance, and the security instrument, or at least an identification of what was the security in that case. And we feel that that's, you know, our duty and transparency, and there it is.
Let's see. Could you expand on what type of instruments can be used for security?
Very good question, very timely. So our preferred and easiest is letters of credit, so-called irrevocable letters of credit. An irrevocable letter of credit is an instrument that's purchased from a bank. And when I say purchased, I mean that it's going to cost some amount of money, not a huge amount, but you know, not an insignificant amount. It's some percentage of the total amount that the bank is basically insuring, for the lack of a better term. So the bank will do an underwriting on the request. Let's say it's $100,000. A bank will do underwriting based on asset value and debt coverage, and they say, yeah, we will pay up to $100,000 on demand, and that may cost $100 or something in that neighborhood. I'm not sure exactly what. But so our preferred liquid instrument is an irrevocable letter of credit. Second on the list is a mortgage interest. Obviously, we have to have primary position, and that makes it difficult if the company has outstanding liens on its mortgage. I guess thirdly, I would say I'm putting them in kind of order of precedence, preference. So maybe a UCC filing on receivables, if there's enough capacity for that. You know, and along those lines, I mean, we try to be as flexible as possible. Equipment is tough because of the discount and the specialized nature of equipment. And there are surety bonds that are very much like a letter of credit, except that they actually are produced by an insurance company. And in that case, the insurance company has to understand what they're underwriting, and the questions that have come up along those lines from surety companies have been compliance, non-compliance, and clawback. So in other words, if they're going to calculate the underwriting, they need to know what the clawback will be. And the clawbacks are slightly different for each project, but they will be some proportional amount of LEDA versus jobs created. And it won't be, you know, there's 100% clawback that calls for if the project just shuts down, if the company just shuts down, then obviously we're going to 100% clawback, but good luck getting the money from a shutdown company. But you know, we're required to get that. That's statutorily required. So irrevocable letter of credit, mortgage interest, UCC filing, and a surety bond. Those are the top four. And everything after that, we can start having conversations about the value of horses and donkeys and yaks and things like that. I don't know, but we try to be as flexible as we can be. But we do have no flexibility because the statute was passed in 2012 that basically, while we used to have more flexibility about the security, the statute that was passed basically tied our hands. So we need something, and we need to be able to demonstrate that something.
All right. The next question from Paul is getting at, I guess in his community, both the local municipality and county require the company provide all of the same information as contained in the online application, to which the company only has access after approval. Is there some type of mechanism to combine applications and alleviate the redundancy and kind of antagonizing the company?
Thank you for that, Paul. I think to the extent that, again, a lot of communities just use our application, and we, you know, in this particular case, we're, you know, print up and PDF the materials to them. So to answer your question, it's very difficult because some communities, for instance, Albuquerque and Santa Fe, have very specific provisions and different things that they're looking for in their application. By and large, from our online application, it's a lot of, if you've got it already written out, it's just uploading it to the site. Besides typing in the actual name of the people, and you know, you have to type in the name of the official that we'll be communicating with throughout the process, and then the specific company information, address, name, et cetera, those sorts of things. But by and large, I would say 80%, I think, of our online application is literally just uploading documents, PDFs. So I think somebody timed it, they got it all done in less than an hour, and that was with a lot of questions. So, you know, I think that that's a, you know, it would be great if we could do that, but it's very difficult given that different jurisdictions may have different statutory requirements that they're looking for in the application.
And it brings up an issue that we've dealt with in the past, that if you're an EDO or you have a good relationship with the company, if that's something that you want to take on and you want to help the company enter the information, then that'd be a discussion that we could have if the company elects someone whoever they're choosing to fill out the application, because we've had that come up.
Good point. It's a good point. So we can provide access to an economic development organization or the community economic developer if the company so chooses, and you can help them upload that information and put it up, as well as the regional reps. Again, I mean, I can't emphasize enough that we really encourage the communities to work closely with the regional representatives, both to identify projects, bring them forward, and then help get the completion done.
The next question is from Lisa. What amount of the business needs to be manufacturing based?
The amount that's requesting LEDA funds, I guess, is the answer. So, okay, so this is a perfect, I can use a perfect example of breweries, which, by the way, we're starting to get a little bit of, pinging on from my boss about the breweries. So, but in any event, breweries, as everybody probably knows, are one part production and one part retail, right? So everything associated with the production side would be what's covered under the LEDA. So the job creations on the production side and the use of funds are on the production side in general terms. So, there's no formula per se. It's just whatever is, if you're a base activity, then it all qualifies. But so if like a brewery, would be limited to the production, expanding the warehouse, doing stuff like that.
Next question is, if a business has limited profits but can show demand for expansion, will this help the approval process for the financial review?
Yes, because it's going to be critical for us to determine if the very popular web series, you've got the audiences moving around here, but come on down. So yes, it's very important for us to demonstrate, especially for a startup or an expanding company. We want to be able to give as much consideration for companies that are transitioning or changing into something that may be more profitable. So absolutely, in that conversation, we in the finance team are more than happy to have with the company so that we best understand what their intentions are and how this market change will affect them. But absolutely, getting that started as soon as possible is critical.
And it looks like this is the final question. Can you explain if there are any limitations on reimbursements, whether the dollars come from the general fund or severance tax?
Sounds like an insider to me. Okay, so yes. So just so everybody understands, while money is a fungible thing, we draw from different funding sources for each LEDA project. Currently, on a gross level, we have about $63 million. That's a gross number from the last legislative session. A net number of amount that is available is somewhere to $35 million. That's uncommitted and unexpended funds. So you cannot use severance tax bonds to offset lease payments. You can use general funds to offset lease payments. So that's kind of the standard walking line that we have for the use of funds. Generally, we're reimbursing for construction activities. We do not reimburse for equipment. It's land, building, and infrastructure. And within certain parameters, there are some soft costs associated. There's A&E on the front end, engineering, architecture and engineering. I fall into the acronym trap, but so there are some soft costs that we cover on the front end, but generally we're talking about hard construction and we're lease payments. So you cannot use severance tax money on lease payments. So if I know that the company's requesting the offset of lease, then I know I have to go and look and see whether we have funding available in the general fund. And my last check on that was roughly, yes, about $10 million. But again, the the thing to keep in mind there is that the general funds are always subject to sweep by the legislator, depending on the circumstances of our budgetary situation. So in the last go around, there was some sweeps and some offsets. So they did sweep back some general fund, and then they gave us back severance tax money. The other thing to keep in mind is that we currently have to sell the bonds in order to utilize the funds. We have, as I mentioned, $34 million, but about $10 million of that is in an unsold bond, and so that won't be available until December. So timing is critical and crucial, and that's why we really need to have a good sense of the public process and the timeline for that. We need to understand what the intended use of the funds are, and we need to have a very good understanding of the overall public benefit. I talked a lot about public benefit from our perspective as being job creation, but the other thing that we take into account is the communities from their perspective. It could be expanding the tax base is a crucial thing for that community, or it could be that incentivizing that targeted industry is crucial for that community. So all those things go into the mix. At the end of the day, there must be some job creation, but based on the community support for the project, the Secretary's decision, could adjust things accordingly.
And we got another question. If a company is reluctant to provide security, can the community provide that collateral for them?
That's an interesting question. I don't know that you could legally do that without some offset, unless the community owns the asset. Again, look at our Constitution. You can't use public funds for private gain or private entities unless there's a demonstrated, a quantifiable public benefit. So if a community wants to put up collateral or security for a company, it's going to have to enter into its own LEDA in order to comport with the Constitution. So I don't know that a community could do that. Now, what a community can do is, let's say a community owns a business park. So the community can leverage that asset, not so much in terms of, or more specifically, I guess one of the very rare cases that we did where we enhanced a public facility that was a business park in order to facilitate the job growth. I mean, that was a unique case of a community that was in essentially a disaster situation, and and needed some alleviation. But by and large, I don't really see how a community could provide a private entity security without some LEDA offset on its own. Yeah, the question is, I mean, again, the statute requires that there be a clawback. So who do you claw back? How do you claw back? Do you sell the community asset? I mean, it's an interesting proposition. But again, I would go back and say to the community, how do you legally enter into that agreement with the company? So that is it. I want to thank everybody for their attention. I'm going to turn it over to Joanna, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what's coming up in the future.
Thank you. We have a couple events coming up that are financially related, so we want to make you aware of those. An exciting workshop is happening August 31st in Tucumcari, and this is addressing brownfield funding. So hopefully, if you don't know what a brownfield is, do you have a brownfield area in your community? This workshop is for you. We'll have presenters from Department of Environment, EDA, Economic Development, KSU, Kansas State University. The COG representatives will be there. There will be a lot of people on hand to address issues related around brownfields in your community. So that's August 31st. If you're interested, email us. We'll get you the registration link. Also, we have a REDA workshop, which REDA stands for Rural Economic Development Assistance. And this is a new program that we're working on in conjunction with the Energy, Minerals, Natural Resources Department. And this is a program that is targeting rural businesses and ag-related businesses to help them decrease their energy consumption and essentially become more efficient and save money. Our first workshop, we're going to have them all over the state over the course of 2 years, but the first workshop will be we're tentatively September 19th. I know that there's some construction going on the road to get up to Taos, so we might move that date back a little bit, but stay tuned for that. We also have a webinar series that's been pretty successful with our Fund It group, and the next topic is addressing accessing funding for your community's projects. How to improve your approach. So this workshop is going to be with Terry Bruner, the past USDA State Director, and Robert Nelson, who is with the Grants Collective, and they're going to be speaking on how do you improve your community's approach to attract some of the federal dollars and other grant opportunities. You can register there at the link, and then of course the exciting Infrastructure Finance Conference is coming up. That'll be in Santa Fe, October 25th through the 27th. And our department will be participating, as well as most state agencies. So those are the major events that are coming up. We hope you can participate in. And here's our contact information. Like I said, we will put this on YouTube, and then we'll send this PowerPoint to all the registered users.
And if anybody has any burning questions that did not get addressed, feel free to just email Joanna. No, email both of us anytime you want. And we wanted to introduce the newest member of our team today. Crystal Clearwater has joined us. And thank you very much for joining our team. And we look forward to putting your name on the contact sheet so they can call you as well. So thank you all, everybody. Thanks to Therese Varela, the division director, for making it all possible. And we will see you all very, very soon. I'll see some of you in Tucumcari. But thanks a lot, and bye-bye.